and I apologize to Andre and Patrick. I didn't do my research to get all of your background, which I'm sure are quite well. But maybe you guys want to say a little bit about your background as well.
Thank you, Tom, very much. Thank you all of you for giving us the opportunity to kind of share with you some of the work that we've been involved with. Today we will be focusing on presenting the ANEMI model as it is right now, but that's the product of the pretty long process of development and involvement of many people. Patrick and Andre are, Patrick was my doctoral student, and he is now joining, he joined the consulting world. He was involved in the development of the last phase of the model, and Dr. Andre Chardon was originally from Brazil and was my postdoc for a number of years at Western, and he was involved in development of this interactive tool that we will be demonstrating and showing at the end. Both of them were working in the associated areas of the kind of climate change impacts and other projects. Today's focus is on the ANEMI model. Our plan for today was that I'll give a little bit of kind of history of the development, and then Patrick will go into details of the model just to kind of explain the main components. There is a lot of material to be kind of assimilated in a 1-hour presentation, but we will make this definitely available, as well as happy to kind of answer questions after the presentation. I also incorporated almost all the publications related to ANEMI into the presentation, and I pointed to Abigail that all the publications will be available if you would like me to share them with you. The kind of starting point, I don't think for this audience is essential to say this, is that we are kind of living through the major global change manifested through the changes in population growth and migrations, climatic change, as well as the land use change, where I'm mostly kind of thinking about the huge kind of move towards the urban areas or urbanization. And these changing conditions, the changing conditions are affecting both soft and hard infrastructure. And depending on our kind of interest, I think we come into that picture from different sides. But as Tom was pointing out, we end up in this kind of nexus which overlaps, the impacts of energy, water, population change, and so on. I would like to emphasize the role of the kind of global change on the soft infrastructure that we kind of quite often, do not pay tremendous attention to, kind of impacts on the kind of institutional arrangements, the social, even impacts on the kind of cultural trends and so on. The two key outcomes, the two key consequences of this kind of changing conditions are increasing the complexity of the problems that we are dealing with, as well as the uncertainty. And answer to or addressing the complexity in this context, we are following the systems approach. That's my bias, my background, and very strong belief one way of kind of solving and dealing with these problems successfully. The being or considering water to be the kind of central part of this, the kind of system that we are considering here can be looked at as a social system of 4 subsystems working together: individuals, organizations, and societies embedded into environment and connected through the flows of resources and the information. The information kind of determines the resource used by different subsystems, and the values are kind of providing meaning to these information flows. A bit of history starts with definitely this book. most of you were not born when the book was published, 70, early 70s. I was a graduate student in late 70s and early 80s in California, and I had assignment to read this book and write an essay on it. The book was, I think, this is one of the rare books published in 30 million copies, translated into 35 different languages, and basically focused on the integrated view of the development through the system dynamics modeling approach, and the model known at that time as the world model, originating from MIT group of Professor Meadows, and a number of people working together, including people from Sweden, in Europe, and so on. The main question, and the reason I mentioned in the book, is that at that time I got the A+ in on the essay that I wrote, but I was puzzled how come that water was not even mentioned in this book. How come that everything else that I was doing as a graduate student over there was pointing out the importance of the water resources, management of the water resources, issues related to the quality, availability, and so on. And on the global scale, we don't even touch that question. So somehow I left this with the question in mind to try and answer, where is the water in all that kind of complex assessment of the world. So I came back to that question much later in my life, around 2000, and basically took the world model. In the meantime, there was another book published by Professor Meadows. It was the book known as Beyond the Limits. And that particular book provided update of what the original work with the world model did, as well as 12 different potential scenarios of the development. So I created as an assignment for myself to first add to the world model sectors water. So it was a relatively simple modification of the kind of introduction of the water availability and demand into the context of the world model. And then I successfully processed all the 12 scenarios provided by the Beyond the Limits, and did show that outcomes of all 12 scenarios are majorly being affected by water. One of the kind of key messages out of this work was that the water quality seems to be one of the very serious issues, mobilizing huge amounts of fresh water, and therefore in that kind of global balance, creating pretty significant impact on population, food production, exploitation of resources, and so on. So that was my contribution. That was my kind of work, and that then gave me opportunity to, I communicated with Professor Meadows also at that time. Then kind of starting the work, I wanted to ask the question, did I miss something in the previous work, and where is the water? And I got from him very simple answer in form of question: what's the issue? So the kind of issue is what you will be kind of hearing, and what the answers of this initial work was, and I think the answer that we are providing now with this much more powerful tool. So moving to Canada and starting this particular research was initiated by our NSERC, is similar to NSF in the United States. That's a Canadian funding agency for natural sciences and engineering. And I was lucky to obtain a number of grants just to focus on this type of work. The most significant was the strategic grant. That strategic grant gave us opportunity to work with a number of people in different areas, as well as partners from the government. The main objectives in the development of ANEMI was, kind of development of the system dynamics-based model of the society, biosphere, climate system to kind of provide a bridge between the science and policy communities, and also to evaluate various options, because that work was done in the context of the Canadian participation in the global efforts to address the climate change. The interdisciplinary team contributed pretty significantly to the structure of the model, the ways how we approach the development, as well as the kind of questions and scenarios created for the simulation with the model. We had systems people, my research group basically leading, and we had the people coming from the policy side, from the political science, especially focusing on the climate questions. And we had a number of economists working very closely with us in bringing kind of energy economy strength to the model. Due to this, really significant strategic grant, we were able to get the full support of the number of federal departments. Environment Canada, now it's called Environment and Climate Change Canada, Natural Resources Canada, Department of Finance, Department of Fisheries and Oceans, Agriculture. They all kind of participated with us through that strategic project in kind of evaluating the basic concepts behind the development of the model, and then providing and assisting us in really formulating the scenarios that will be answering questions of importance to these different departments. I would consider this to be a very significant part that contributed really to what we incorporated in the model and how we try to set the simulations to provide assistance to the policymakers. So out of this work, Evan was the first one who provided a contribution with the development of the first version with 8 basic sectors focusing on the kind of social and biophysical feedbacks within the system. You see the water being now in the middle and connected to population, land use, carbon cycle, climate, as well as relatively simple economy representation in this version. After the version 1, the process continues with the second version. That was basically that was the stage when we entered into strategic research project. This version expanded food and energy sectors, added the population sector again in expanded form. I think one of the main kind of feature of the second version was the energy economy sector that was set in a very traditional kind of view of economics, with basically optimization of the kind of energy distribution and everything else, working within the simulation framework that was connecting all other sectors to the economy. That was at first very demanding, and also it was giving us a lot of difficulties in creating a feasible set of solutions when you have such a comprehensive representation, and integrating the optimization within that extensive simulation was a really major task. The third version that we are right now at expanded further, carbon cycle to include a couple of nutrient and nitrogen and phosphorus cycles into better representation of water quality. Energy and economy sector were expanded and completely redone, now basically converting the whole model into simulation environment. We added pollution sector and sea level rise, and that was the work that Patrick completed, for his PhD. So this is where we are right now. Patrick, please take over.
Okay, so Thanks everyone for having me. I'm just going to share my screen here. Screen one. I think you're seeing the wrong section.
Yes,
Okay.
sharing the other screen will do it.
Yep.
It's always confusing.
Yeah, we don't use Zoom very much at my workplace. We typically use Teams, so coming onto Zoom, I have to relearn everything.
The other thing I want
Okay.
to is that I keep limits to growth
Good.
on my bedside. When I need to remember what's important, here it is.
Yeah, good, Fernando.
Awesome.
Okay, Patrick. Yeah.
Okay, so thanks for having me. And I'm going to talk a bit about the model structure of ANEMI in its current form, which includes 12 model sectors, all interconnected. And so these sectors are climate, the carbon cycle, population, land use, food production, sea level rise, the hydrologic cycle, water demands, energy economy, our water supply development sector, which builds off of energy economy, nutrient cycles, and persistent pollution. So there are many components now of the model, many different interactions, and I think it will help if we break down those different sectors and talk about what they're doing. Okay. All right, so the climate sector in ANEMI captures the dynamics of heat exchange between the deep ocean and the combined upper atmospheric layers, along with a cooling effect that acts to limit this temperature increase. One sec. Okay, so the first component is a feedback cooling effect, while the second represents the diffusion of heat in the atmospheric stock to the ocean stock. These two negative feedbacks act to dampen the system's response to radiative forcing, which comes from increased greenhouse gas concentrations in the carbon cycle and greenhouse gas subsystems. So the carbon cycle in ME3 is used to model the flow of carbon through the Earth system from atmosphere to land and oceans. Atmospheric carbon is consumed by land storage stocks through plant processes. And then carbon on land is modeled through biomass, litter, humus, and stabilized humus and charcoal. The processes of humification, decay, and carbonization move carbon through the land stocks and back into the atmosphere. Carbon is then diffused between the atmosphere and a set of ocean layers. And energy production, land use, and climate change all act to influence the carbon cycle and atmospheric concentrations. For example, energy production injects CO2 into the atmosphere. Climate change acts to accelerate the land processes and diffusion of carbon in the ocean layers. And land use acts to release CO2 from the land stocks. The population sector in the ANEMI model is largely based on the World 3 model in limits to growth, with some additions to it. In the population sector, there's one main positive feedback loop, which acts to drive the system and is responsible for the exponential growth of human population. All the other loops act to limit population growth and are characterized by crowding, pollution, resource limitations such as food and water, economic conditions, and changing ideal family sizes over time. Okay. The land use sector in ANEMI is used to describe the global distribution of land use and cover over time. This is done by modeling the rates at which one land use or cover type is converted to another. There are 6 main land use and cover classes in this model, which are tropical forest, temperate forest, grassland, semi-desert and tundra, agricultural land, and built area or urban area. So these changes in land use are an important consideration for ANEMI, as it affects agricultural land for food production, and the conversion of land releases CO2 into the carbon cycle, thus affecting climate change. The changes in land use are mainly driven by population, as the conversion rates are a function of the population growth rate. So the hydrologic sector, the hydrologic cycle sector in ANEMI describes the flow of water from oceans to atmosphere, onto the land surface, and through groundwater and streams back to the ocean again as a continuous cycle. Each point in the hydrologic cycle can be considered as a kind of reservoir from which water flows to and from. These feedback loops illustrate the movement of water from the atmosphere to the ocean as rainfall, or sorry, from the atmosphere to the land surface as rainfall or snowfall, and then back to the atmosphere through evaporation and evapotranspiration. It's also shown that the land and ocean water volumes, as they increase, have increased evaporation through that greater surface area. And advection of water over oceans and to land surfaces is represented based on a difference in water content. So changes in climate influence this cycle through increased evapotranspiration rates, increased ice melt, snow melt processes, and generally intensify the flows through the hydrologic cycle. And then human withdrawal alters the timing of natural flows and removes water from the cycle through consumption. The water demand sector in ANEMI is based on desired water withdrawals of agricultural, domestic, and industrial water users. The domestic water withdrawals are based on structural water intensities, which relate to economic factors such as GDP. And that converts to withdrawal rates per person, which grow with increasing populations. The industrial water demand is based on the level of energy production and the types of technologies that are used. This is kind of an aggregated way of getting at that industrial water demand over time. And the agricultural water demand is based on the amount of land used for food production. And that's subject to increasing temperatures with climate change. So there's no feedbacks within this sector itself, but it has many connections to the other sectors of the model. So now I'm going to discuss the energy economy sector. Professor Simonovic mentioned that this was kind of a point that we wanted to improve in the most recent version. And so it's quite different from before. But basically, the energy economy sector is split into different subsectors. There's one for goods production, one for the energy production, and one for energy capital. So on this slide here, we're showing the goods production structure of the model. And there's 5 main feedback loops to show the production of goods from the global capital stock. And so what these loops are showing are the adjustment of the capital stock in response to relative cost and marginal production of capital. They're showing a gap between the desired and actual capital stock, which is kind of adjusted over time. And they're also showing the effect of the expected output growth rate on investment, and capital depreciation over time. So the energy production component is used to meet demands for energy within the global economy. And the production of energy is disaggregated into 4 types. We have coal, oil and gas, hydro and nuclear power, and renewables. So the capacity of energy production is set by the amount of capital stock that has been accumulated into each source, and it's influenced by production pressures and profit incentives. Limitations on energy production are in the form of depletion and saturation for non-renewable and renewable energy sources. Depletion refers to the use of limited resource stocks, for example, fossil fuels, thereby increasing the effort and cost required to extract the resource. And saturation refers to diminishing returns on energy production effort. For example, the most ideal sites are taken first to implement wind and solar farms or dams for hydropower generation. And this last component of the energy economy sector is the energy capital sector. And so the capital stocks for the different energy sources are structured in a similar way to that of the goods production capital stock. The main difference is that there's an intermediate stock, which represents energy capital under construction, which after a time delay becomes new energy capital. Okay, so the water supply development sector in ANEMI mirrors that of the energy production sector by adding capital stocks to produce water supply in the form of surface water, groundwater, wastewater reuse, and desalination. So these additional capital stocks support water supply in a similar way to energy production. And the limitations of saturation and depletion also apply. With greater amounts of capital in these stocks, we have a greater capacity for water supply. And as available water resources become depleted, more effort is required to produce the same rate of water supply as it becomes depleted, which makes it more expensive. For example, when groundwater levels decrease from over abstraction, more pumping is required to extract the same amount of water resource. Water demand and available water resources are used to describe the level of water stress, which acts to drive further investment in water supply. And surface water quality also has an influence on production cost, which you can see in green in this diagram. So the capital stocks for each type of water supply are aggregated and used to form a component of the global aggregate. And then a portion of that economic output from the global capital stock is reinvested back into water supply and allocated to different supply types based on the unit costs of producing water supply. So with this sort of structure, you can see how the water supply development kind of mirrors that of energy. And this is sort of a way of incorporating an economic component into water supply in our model, which allows us to test different things. So the food production sector in ANEMI 3, or in the ANEMI model, models global food production, which is ultimately used to determine the level of food per capita as an indicator for limitations of population growth. The production of food is influenced by many different factors, including land fertility, the amount of arable land available, water, and nutrients. There's 2 main feedback loops which drive food production. One positive loop, which represents the effect of increased food production, driving more reinvestment into increasing land fertility, thus increasing food production again. The negative loop represents decreasing land yield due to land erosion, which causes less arable land to be available for food production. Climate change effects are included in this sector through impacts to land yield due to heat stress, increases in potentially arable land in northern regions with increasing temperatures, and sea level rise inundation, reducing agricultural land. The nutrient cycles in the ANEMI model attempt to capture the global stocks of nitrogen and phosphorus through land, rivers and lakes, ocean and atmosphere in order to provide an indicator of water quality. Anthropogenic inputs to these cycles include wastewater from domestic and industrial sources and agricultural runoff. And the global nutrient stocks mimic those of the hydrologic cycle in order to capture aggregated nutrient concentrations. Okay, I think the last sector is the persistent pollution sector. This is used to describe the generation and assimilation of pollutants over time that may be harmful to the global biosphere. This is more or less based on the World 3 model. And it's used to form an additional negative feedback on population growth as pollution levels increase. The main drivers for generation of persistent pollution are industrial and agricultural activity, while population economic output are used to scale these effects in the global system. Technological changes act as a reduction factor for the levels of persistent pollution generation, while the natural rate of assimilation represents the environmental capacity to cope with and break down these pollutants over time. Global sea level rise is represented in ANEMI, but it's captured very simplistically through a relationship with global surface temperature change as modeled in the climate sector. And the equation used is based on a previous study that demonstrated a highly significant correlation to global temperature changes and mean sea level rise. Although this sector is very simple, it's used to represent important impacts to global agriculture through reductions in arable land with climate change. So the model was validated on a global level through comparison to available global data sets for population, temperature change, water demands and supply, energy production, and global land area. Here we show the ANEMI results as dotted lines with the global data sets. And overall, we found a good agreement with the model results and global data sets with the intention of capturing the overall behavior of the Earth system. As there's many different working parts, we're not necessarily trying to match the values, but we want to capture that general behavior in all of the different sectors together. The model results were also compared to future projections from the UN, IPCC, and others to give a sense of where our model stands. In terms of population growth, we're on the lower end of the most recent UN projections, likely due to the inclusion of dynamic feedbacks acting as limits to growth. And for temperature change, our results are most similar to the RCP6 scenario from the IPCC, which represents a future that does not include additional efforts to constrain emissions. Okay, so that's kind of where our model stands. And with that, I'll pass it to Andre to talk about the web-based tool of our model.
Thank you, Patrick. Do you mind if I share my screen or?
Just a minute. I think I have to.
Yep, you have to allow me to do it.
Turn mine off. Just trying to get to the meeting controls. Oh, here we go.
Yeah.
That should be better.
Yeah, I'm also not used to Zoom. I'm also used to Teams, but it seems very fast. Okay. I start with. Can you guys see my screen?
Yeah, we can.
Okay. Yeah, I will just start with this. Yeah, first of all, thank you for inviting me to this meeting, and I would like to thank also Professor Patrick for inviting me to work on this project. And my initial idea was, whoa, I will be learning ANEMI, but I quickly realized how complex the model is. And if you guys had the chance to open the model in Vensen, you will see how complex it is and how amazing the model is. So during this project, while I was building the tool, I basically focus on their input instead of just relying on the model itself, because it has so many different sectors. It's difficult to follow. So the idea of the tool is build easy to use and interactive tool. Obviously, you will see it's a simplified representation of the model, but I think our plan is to continue, hopefully expanding on this prototype or initial version we are presenting. And then you will see that there are some of the preloaded scenarios that Professor and Patrick have selected. And then basically each of these scenarios, they have also a pre-selected number of variables, because the model has thousands of them. So they have selected a very nice set of variables that obviously is a reasonable number that the user can change and see how it is impacting the outputs or the metrics. I will demo how this is done and how the user can see how the model reacts to these changes. And then what we have done, we are basically showing the graph, the outputs in the form of graphs, and we are allowing the user to export this data. And what we have done, so this is running on a server, and we have a user interface, and on the background, what we are doing is we are basically running the model that was prepared by Patrick, by Professor, and his former students. So that's how it's working, and we are trying some optimizations to make it run a little bit faster. Basically, when one run is done, it's stored somewhere. So next time a user with the same set of combination of variables doesn't need to wait for the whole model to run. Okay, I will go through these sections of the tool, like the main menu, the graphs, the results. We have what we call the variable panel, and then a help section. So let me just jump into the. Okay, how do I now stop this? Okay, just a second. Okay, you should be seeing my, this is a browser window. You should be seeing that. Can you just confirm you're seeing? Okay. So this is the initial page of the tool. I think we have provided the URL, but if you didn't, we can do it after, Professor. And so the tool is organized in a few parts. We have the top menu, which is basically where we are showing the list of scenarios I was mentioning. There are two ways to access them, by clicking this option, and then they are organized by the sectors. I forgot to mention that. So we have basically 5 sectors, and each of the sectors has a set of runs. So we have a few of them, and it depends on the selection, on the input of the user. There is another way to find them by scrolling on this list. This list is searchable, so if I want to filter using the keyboard, I can filter, or if I'm interested in climate change, I can filter by that. And by selecting the run, or either from this list or either from the drop-down, I, as a user, will immediately see on the left side a summary graph, which is showing the most important, what Patrick and Professor defined as the most important metrics for this specific selection the user has done. And underneath, it's a little bit more expanded list, and with more results. And on the right side, we have what we are calling the variable panel. First, we have a description of the scenario, then follows a description of each of the variables for this specific scenario. So in this case, we have just a few that the user can change. And then the last part is what we are calling the history. So if you are making a lot of changes, we are recording what you're doing, and then the user, if he wants to just reload or just recover a scenario he had done previously, just clicking will bring back the selection. So I will just make a change to show what will happen. So for each of the change, we are calling this a run. So what you will see, the summary graph is reflecting my latest selection, because we are showing four metrics already, and then if we show more, it will become difficult to read and understand. So the summary graph is always reflecting my latest selection, but here on the more detailed graphs, we always keep the baseline, which is like the default values of the model without any changes. And then as I add runs, we are number them, and we will be adding them to the graphs. So I have one run. If I change, let's say, another variable, I will change like the future scenario to an RCP 8.5 and run it again. It will add one more set of outcome or outputs to my graphs. This is not showing because there is no change on these graphs, but you see some of the variables are changing, like the carbon emissions is obviously changing, and this is reflecting the selections I have done on this left side. Oh, sorry, on the right side, and so on. And then basically what we are doing is showing, even on these graphs, we are showing up to four lines. And as I keep adding runs, let's say the first run I will remove, and then we are adding the latest. So you will see run 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then the other option I was mentioning is export. This is basically exporting everything into one Excel file. Let me see if I can just show this here. So it's basically exporting everything that is presented on our screen, the variable selection, and then the values of the graphs, the outputs that are presented on the graphs. So if the user would like to do some post-processing, that's how it will be done. We have reset. It will reset everything to the baseline. It will clear out all the graphs, all the runs, and everything is resetted to the baseline. We have share. If you like to share it with someone, export to data, and then we have just a simple help menu, which is describing the tool quickly, and we have also some good references and the blue book that was prepared by Patrick and Professor and other published papers on ANEMI. Okay, that was a quick overview. And Professor, if you like to add something else, or
No, I think we are kind of okay. The basic functionalities are presented, and if the audience have questions, we can kind of come back to that. I would prefer to kind of finish presentation and give chance people to kind of ask some questions. So Andre, you stop sharing and now kind of bring the last slide, and we will.
Okay.
Thank you both for very effective presentation. Is my screen visible?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So in a kind of given amount of time, we try to do our best and kind of give you the feeling of the model content, the kind of objectives of the development of the tool, the current state of the tool, as well as this special version for interactive use that's available to the public. I would like to continue a little bit this work in a couple of different directions, and one that we are already making considerable progress is move from kind of global to regional scale. The kind of global modeling was motivated with the word model, but also motivated by the number of important sectors like carbon, climate, land use, population, which are picking up the dynamics at the global scale. However, to be effective in the policy making, we need to kind of come down. We need to move to kind of lower regional scales. The strategic project required, for example, answering very important questions of importance to Canada, and we did develop a particular scheme how to link the global model to Canadian scale by introducing different ways of downscaling the information that's occurring on the global scale, and modeling the sectors and information that is generated on the regional scale. There are still some pretty significant issues in this communication, because there is a very clear feedback between the local and global scales, and kind of capturing these feedbacks is not very easy, and we are not yet at that level. So the Canada model was developed at that time when we were working on a strategic project, and I think it did answer the questions and helped a little bit the Canadian policy making. With another postdoc from China, I just finished the work on the development of the Yangtze Basin model, and that's a pretty interesting, being one of the largest basins in China that is, containing a huge portion of the population and economic activities. Yangtze is very kind of interesting for kind of finding out the relationships between the globally changing conditions and local. We not only that we consider the Yangtze Basin as a kind of region, but we needed to divide the basin into 3 subregions because of the different characteristics and different types of activities that are occurring. This work is completed, the model and the simulations. We are now in the process of preparing some technical documentation for the model as well as the publications. I already mentioned that I would like to do a little bit more in this area of multi-scale issues and the ways of trying to actually explicitly model the feedbacks between different scales. For the tool, the vision is improvement in on the technical side. The people from the Vensim, from the company that's producing the software, was very impressed with our work, but they also provided some interesting suggestions how we can compile the model for the web and basically run on the web faster than what we are doing. But you've seen Andres runs. That's really very acceptable even in the current form. And definitely we would like to expand the number of scenarios. The approach will need to be very much the same as Andre presented. The certain set of variables will need to be set or kind of embedded for a particular scenario, and user will have only a reduced set of variables to experiment with. This is the kind of simple explanation is that model is very large and you need to have initial values for activating almost every stock variable, and leaving that to the user outside will be basically overwhelming. So that's where we are. We will be very happy if we can answer some questions. And I made a typo here. So it's the link to the tool is globalchange-uwo.ca. And you can easily test it, run it. Documentation is through the help menu. You can download even the documentation or the user's manual. Or if you have any questions, you can send me an email and I'll be very happy to kind of answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you for presenting such an interesting talk. Usually we start with questions from students, so I'll open the floor to see if any of the students have questions.
Probably I can just start with a general question. Since I did some like system dynamics modeling during my PhD, so I know like your work for like this global scale model is very complicated for sure. So I was just wondering, like for when you were like testing the model, did you guys notice like any feedback loops that plays the most important role in simulating this global, like, because there are so many different factors, like is there any variables come into picture that affects other variables behaviors the most?
It's a very good question. When you deal with a model of this size, I would actually ask Patrick to possibly answer this question. We did a very extensive sensitivity, or Patrick did very extensive sensitivity analysis to change in a particular variables that are part of the feedbacks in order to assess how important are these feedbacks and for the final outputs. Patrick, maybe you can expand a little bit there.
Sure. I would say that in this type of model, the population growth is kind of one of the most important feedbacks because it sort of drives everything else as well. With more population, we have more resource consumption, more pollution, more economic growth, and it's that main driving factor in the system. And sort of the limits to that they become stronger over time in the model. So the resource constraints and the effects of pollution are stronger towards the end. So you have kind of a shift in the dominance of different feedback loops. We didn't do a full assessment on the feedback dominance of the model, but I did have an idea to be able to test that. It involves running the model many times and perturbing those different loops and assessing what the relative effect is at different points in the model as well. So it's tough to say, exactly which things are important at which time, but in general, the driving population growth loop would be most important in the beginning, and then towards the end, we have those limits to growth essentially. That's a good question.
Yeah, I should probably also mention we are talking, in this model about 8,000-9,000 feedbacks, working at the same time, and kind of identifying those that are kind of directly affecting, or most to a higher extent affecting the outcomes is not trivial. Evan and I actually went into some kind of selective testing for the key driving forces within particular sector. So that, I think Patrick did capture that in his presentation by identifying these identified feedbacks are the most significant for the sector. But when you combine them all together, you get these dynamics that are, product of the interaction between all of them.
Thank you.
I had a question on, I guess, sort of different parameters for different regions. And I think you kind of mentioned something about agricultural yield being different in the northern regions at some point. Could you explain more about how like different parameters could be different based on regions?
Patrick, you can do that. Yeah, I think it's a...
Okay. Yeah. Well, currently the model is globally aggregated. There's some disaggregation in different sectors. For example, like the land use types, those are kind of capturing the same general behavior, but the units are parameterized differently. So the talk about the northern regions, potentially providing more arable land for agriculture, that's just based on a functional relationship developed in the literature. But the actual northern region is not like a separate component of the model. And so that's what Professor Simonovic was getting at in terms of regionalizing the model. We're trying to find a way to connect that global scale to different regional scales, maybe through things like different parameterization schemes and things like that. But scale is very important because as you change your system boundary, you actually change the structure of the system as well. When you're looking at something globally, the structure is actually fundamentally different from looking farther down. Different components become more important at different scales. It's a good question.
Thanks.
Yeah, if you follow up our work, and especially this regional Yangtze Basin model, you will see we started with the general structure of ANEMI, and then when you move to basin scale, different questions and different forces are becoming much more important in driving the dynamics. So that at the end, the model ended up being quite different from ANEMI. Even the original idea was to just kind of downscale the current version to a different scale. On the question of additional land for the production, as a consequence of increase of temperature, in ANEMI, this is treated as just globally additional land for the agriculture production. We do not have ability to tell, where is this happening. The literature did develop the relationship between the temperature and that change, and we incorporated that to just capture the overall land availability for the food production.
I have a question. And in some point of the presentation, you mentioned that you have some collaboration with other organizations.
Yeah.
Yeah, how was that process of engaging with them and
Okay.
share information? How they informed your model?
Yeah. This is a very good question, and for me personally, it was a very significant learning experience in a very late date of my professional career. But we worked with the representatives of the 6 federal government departments, and the communication was very carefully prepared and developed before we started the work. So the idea was to present the conceptual ideas of the model structure to the partners and get the feedback. So that through this initial communication, they develop understanding what are we trying to do, and also in their kind of mind try to relay that to the questions that they have interest in. So that was the first stage. Then the second stage, then we did, some development, and the second stage started by the political science student who moved to Ottawa from London and worked with each of the departments individually through the set of interviews, collecting the information on the most important issues for each of these different departments. The outcome of that work was his master thesis, but also it was a very useful input for the model, further details of the model development, in order to allow the users like those who are represented by these 6 different departments to ask the question of the model, obtain the kind of outputs that they can use in the process. Third stage was the presentation of the model. And that involves something similar to this, but the workshop over 2 days with the hands-on experience by the representatives of these different departments, and basically learning the mechanics, how to work with the model. And then the final stage was transfer of the model to each of the departments. This is where we basically lost contact. When the model was transferred, obviously our grant had a also expiration date, and the kind of hope is that those who participated in the process from the beginning, they were very much impressed with the model. I think they are still possibly using it. This is the communication with it, but the reason why I pushed the development of this public-based tool, web-based tool, was to really open this model more to anyone who is possibly interested in. And for now, we are monitoring, for example, how many people are responding, how many people are using. System Dynamics community put our model in one of the cases, so it's available through that to this particular group of people. And I am expecting that with some feedback from the general use of the model, we may actually learn a little bit more how to streamline the first interaction between the model and the user, and also what are the possible questions that we should expand in a set of scenarios that are right now available.
Great, thank you. I like the last stage of model transfer. That's great.
We only have about 5 minutes left, so I'll open the floor to anyone for questions. And then, as the professor said, I'm sure you can email any additional questions that you have.
Yes, let me jump in. So very nice, very nice presentation. So I'm curious about a couple of things. I think so as you move into more local scales, as you were describing, probably the whole structure of the model will change, and so it'll be very, very hard. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it'll be very hard to come up with some structure that could be, just usable everywhere, right? Or in any basin. So what's your strategy in terms of doing the local studies? Is to have a few compile a few examples, or so.
Yeah, Fernando, this is a very good and very important question. I do not have a like a carved in stone answer to that. I would like to say that ANEMI on a global scale, as we presented, is a good starting point for any regional study.
Yeah. Okay.
Because it's general, it includes all the sectors. You as a developer or user, you know what sectors are continuing to function on a global scale. You know what sectors are or need to be modified to properly address the local scale. So that's the process of modifying the structure. Now, how to develop the links between the local and the global scale, that's really the essential question. And, one way is you may conclude that particular sectors are let's say, occurring on a global scale, but they are of no importance on a regional scale. You can exclude them. And that will be one way of doing it. Another way will be to go into a little bit more quantification of the feedbacks. How much is the Canada contributing to the overall concentration of the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, let's say in the carbon cycle? We do have some figures, but if you are kind of plugging in these figures, Canada is, for example, very small percent, very small contribution, you almost do not see any change on the global level for the change within Canada. However, the change within Canada is very important. It's important for policy. Should we go into this direction with, energy development, or should we go in other direction? Should we, impose this type of measures on the carbon emissions or not? So, in my opinion, that deserves. So yes, it is important. It's linked to the global climate, but I think the decisions are really happening within the regional, on the regional scale. And if we continue considering them on a regional scale without including that small percent of change that will be contributing to the global level, we will be able to answer the questions for policymakers at that level. So I would start with the current global scheme, global structure, and then really look and bring what are the important issues at the regional level, and then see, you have to make some judgment of the interactions between them.
Right. Good. Yeah, I have one more question, which is a little bit more pedestrian. So I'm curious as to how you ported the Vensim to the web. And because you hadn't mentioned about compiling on the web, but how are you currently doing it? Because the interface looks very cool.
Okay, Andre is a magician. You have to have a magician, to do that. Andre is a magician. Maybe Andre can explain that to you. This is basically programmed completely. This is a suggestion from Vensim people to do that compilation on the website. We didn't do that. Andre, maybe you can quickly explain how you did it.
Yeah, sure. What we're doing, we're using the Vensim DLL. So it's running on the server side, and then every time the user runs the model, the server is checking if, so what we're doing two things. We are doing a cache, because the runs, the model is, it's not stochastic, so the outcomes should be always the same. So yeah, what we do is, if that set of variables is already stored in the server, we just return it, so it's faster. Otherwise, we have to run the model at least once for that set of variables, and we use the DLL. So it's installed on the server. We have the license for that, and yeah, the server. There is a version that I guess runs on the browser, but I was not able to. Maybe it's because of the complexity of the model, but it ended up not being so slow. We were very concerned at this at the beginning, but let's say for a fresh run, let's say for a combination that no one else had done it before, it will take some 4 or 5 seconds. Yeah.
So
Yeah, you have seen it. I have done
it's very much manageable in the current form.
If you, I can give you more details if you're interested in
Sure, sure. Thank you.
Okay, Abby, we use the time.
Yes, thank you so much to Professor Simonovich, Andre, and Patrick, all for speaking. Yeah, it was a great talk and an excellent discussion.
Okay, as I pointed earlier, if you have any questions, any requests, my email is, if you go to our tool, actually in the help menu, you will find the email is simonovich@uwo.ca. We'll be very happy to share with you the information we have, possibly answer some of the questions if we can, and keep us informed about your work. We will be very happy to learn.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.